cloud. Okay.
All right.
So our two talks for today, the first will be from Steve Ruiz, who's building Tealdraw. I'm not exactly sure what he's going to talk about, but one of the general things I'll kind of let him give an overview of what Tealdraw is and that kind of stuff, and his background leading up to building a spatial canvas. And I'll let you go ahead and go, Steve.
Awesome. Cool. By the way, I'm trying out a new setup where I have my camera kind of iPhone glued to the back of my my monitor here. So let me know if I suddenly start looking very strange or stranger than normal. Good to meet you. My name is Steve, and I make Tealdraw. So Tealdraw is a I guess the most interesting way of talking about it is talking about where it came from. Tealdraw came from, it grew out of some other open source projects that I've worked on. Probably the clearest, background is this project called Globs. So my background is, by the way, one time I was a studio artist. I have a background in visual art, two degrees in visual art. And so when I did get into design and programming and kind of product development, I kind of naturally just drifted back towards some of these same very visual problems that I was working on in a very different way in a former life. So Globs grew out of another project, but it's a design app, I suppose, experimental design app. You can see my screen. Everyone's, yeah, okay, cool. Where all you have to work with are these things called globs, and globs have two nodes, and you can kind of make a glob, and then you can move these nodes around, but they'll always be connected. So there's like an arc, and then like a little Bezier curve segment, and then another arc, and then another Bezier curve segment, and the Bezier curves always hit the glob nodes at a tangent, so you can like make one of them bigger, and this one's small, or connect these globs to globs and line up the handles just right, and hold down spacebar, and now you have this cool like shape like this. And of course, because it was a weird little experimental project, I also threw in a code editor so that you could create these globs programmatically, and now you have the globs here on the left being created by the globs here on the right. And if I wanted to make make them smaller, I think that's how you do it. Yeah. So you could still, it's still a direct manipulation canvas, so you can do things like, drag selection boxes or even like resize things, but it's all weird because it's all globs, and that's all that you have to work with is just globs. There's nothing else but globs in this project. So that's this. It was fun. I built this kind of in public on Twitter, and I did this in part because I was trying to figure out another related problem, which is pressure sensitive variable width lines, which is a just brutally difficult problem. And so if you had maybe like a stylus or something like that, and you were drawing on an iPad or something like Photoshop, the way that it would do that is it would stamp the same shape, like a circle, like many times along a curve, varying the width, along the same pressure curve. But that doesn't really work for the web, doesn't work for SVG, because you want to have like, a vector path. You want to have like an outline of that shape that you can then fill in. And so I started working on this again, kind of mostly on Twitter, mostly in public, trying to figure this out using fairly naive beginnings and taking some weird turns, but ending up with something that works like significantly better than the state of the art as it was when I started. I think the what do you call it, signature JS was like the state of the art, the most popular kind of way of doing this, and the way that, oh man, things have changed. Anyway, they did it just by drawing a lot of little lines, and that doesn't really work for SVG. So I did this way, and it works actually pretty well. And it also, has like cool, like you could taper, the ends like this, or you could taper the whole line. You could taper both sides of the line. And then you get these really strange kind of looking effects like this as you do this. And if you do have like a device like an iPad or something that sends in real pressure data, then that's how it will decide what pressure to use. Otherwise, it'll use the speed and the distance between lines as you draw them. So weird little project, took me in a lot of different directions. Also ended up becoming extremely useful for kind of like whiteboarding apps. So I worked to integrate that into an app called Tealdraw. And so they use my nice little freehand ink algorithm. Tealdraw is a great piece of software. I contributed a lot to it. I did their icons and stuff, or some of them. They've since changed some of the other ones. But working on this project, it seemed like this plus globs. I was like, I'd like to take a shot at that. I'd like to take a shot at building a kind of a whiteboarding app, something that used perfect freehand. In addition, not just for the ink, but also for kind of like the shapes. Like they use a library called Rough.js, which is another wonderful piece of open source software. But it just has its own specific aesthetic. And I'm like, I bet this would also look really nice to use the digital ink, not only for the hand-drawn lines, but also programmatically, right? Because you could just feed in points and have it like come up with something that looks like it's hand-drawn. And so I started on a project which was essentially globs, but with more than just globs. And that turned into, well, first it turned into Tealdraw. Turned into like this. This is my nice camera setup that I made today. Where, yeah, we use the same ink algorithm for like the handwriting as well as the, the shapes, whatever, all the geometric shapes. So this should kind of look a lot like this. I started building this in public again. I was in the middle of being either hired by like Adobe or Figma. So I decided to take a couple of months off, work on this full time while that was being settled. And immediately I got a lot of interest in this project. And I think the reason why I got a lot of interest is that unlike most applications that do this type of problem or do this type of thing, the canvas in Tealdraw is not, it's not an image. It's not like a HTML canvas that's being repainted on every frame, which is pretty normal. You'd find that in Figma and, you name it. Pretty much every application like this uses like a custom renderer mostly for performance reasons, but Tealdraw is not that way. Tealdraw uses HTML and CSS. So if I wanted to crack this open and look at one of these shapes, like these are SVG shapes inside of normal divs, that are being moved, translated around and positioned in a certain way. And the benefit of that is that each one of these shapes and the way that you define what shapes are in Tealdraw is like a React component. So while that is kind of a negative trade-off in a lot of ways for normal graphical stuff, it allows you to do things that are really, really hard to do. It allowed me to do things that are really, really hard to do in those apps like Figma or Tealdraw or anything, which is to create like complex interactive content that is web native. So in most situations where you have text, editing text, you have to kind of like float a text element in front of the screen so that you can edit the text, and then once you're done editing the text, you get rid of that element so that it's just like normal text being painted to the screen. But there's always a difference, and you can see that difference. It's kind of like jumping up and down in Tealdraw. Pretty much every app that does text, you end up seeing this. The exception being something like Figma, where they really did create their own text rendering engine. Not everyone's going to do that. And so the other benefit was that it was open source. And so what we really saw pretty quickly after this was launched, it's also collaborative, and it has hooks for plugging in a collaborative backend and all that. But what we ended up seeing was folks who had ideas for building this type of app, but who didn't want to start from scratch, would take Teal Draw, they'd fork it, and they'd add their own stuff on top of it. So for example, I think one of the first big ones was a product called Legend Keeper. Legend Keeper is for people who are running like Dungeons and Dragons games. And it has maps, and it has kind of like a wiki of all your items and characters and stuff. But what they found was that no matter how they did their data model and no matter how they organized their tool, it was still pretty structured. And the things that structured wiki and stuff is good at are explicit relationships between items. Maybe this is where it gets a little bit tools for thoughty. What it wasn't good at was like casual or soft relationships between stuff. And so they built a whiteboard. Let's see if they have their boards experience. Used to have a blog post on this, maybe they still do. It used to be right at the top, which was great for my my presentation, my presentations. They had a I'm gonna give it one more minute and then I'm gonna bounce into something else. Nope. Anyway, they have a feature where you can essentially put all that content onto a whiteboard, and they built that whiteboard with Teal Draw. So I'm going to have to search. Not, I'm going to go to their competitor, which is World Anvil. World Anvil, essentially the same app, they're direct competitors, but they also use Teal Draw for their whiteboards. And you can see a little bit better what that looks like. So yeah, this should look pretty familiar, right? This is the same app essentially as Tealdraw. It's just they have links to characters or links to places from your wiki, and people have made all sorts of really fun, complicated family trees, storylines. Like any visual representation of these different disparate items from their like articles from their wiki or their blog, and just put that right on the canvas. And that's exactly what it's for. So based on pretty good numbers in terms of who was using Tealdraw and also who was building with it, I ended up starting up a little startup and building a new version of that. Skipping a couple of months of rewrites later, we now have this is currently beta.tealdraw.com. And it is a big rewrite of the app. Still essentially the same feature set, a couple of new things, better embeds and stuff like that. Also collaborative, also free. There's no login. You can't log in even if you want. And it's a lot more, I don't know, it's faster, it's more robust. All the things that you would get from being able to hire a team of people smarter than me to work on this project with me. And it is still for developers. So just, I think it was 2 days ago, we just released like an alpha of Tealdraw for developers. So you can, whatever, there are docs, you can spin up a code sandbox, essentially drop in the entire Tealdraw app into that code sandbox and modify it by adding new shapes or adding new tools and using our APIs to control the canvas and create things, just delete things, all the things that you would hopefully should support any sort of idea of something that you might want to do with it. And it is collaborative, like I said. I don't know if you want to take a picture of your screen and join me here. There's the thing about building a whiteboarding app and a Canvas app just in general is just how big of a nightmare it is to actually build the thing. Like it's a little bit like building a text editor, I would say, maybe even like maps, maybe somewhere between that, like a really intense front end component that has a ton of conventions. What I mean is that like if you are using a text editor and you're typing and then you stop typing for a second and then you keep typing for a little bit longer and then you press undo, you would expect to go back to the place where you stopped, right? You don't want to undo each character at a time. You want to go back to the place where you paused. That's actually kind of tricky to do, and it's very nuanced, and the difference between doing it for 100 millisecond pause versus 200 millisecond pause and et cetera, like can be quite different and can make something feel broken or not. And it's one of those features that you just have to get right And especially in a text editor, there are hundreds of those features. There are thousands of those features eventually. And Canvas is the same way. Like Figma, is like a great leader in the space, not only because the thing works, but because they got all those details right. And I think for Tealdraw, that's also been like our focus on micro UX, I would say. Well, one, it's because it's the type of thing that I like to do. And two is that like essentially that's like the moat for Tealdraw. That's the idea, is that like the value proposition is that you can start working on a product like this without having to work on all that stuff first. And that you can trust that we're probably, I don't know, the people who you would want figuring out, okay, what should the eraser look like, as you're erasing, because we have good opinions or something. I don't know. I'm a complete nerd on this stuff. So and so, yeah, like there are tons and tons of like little parts of this application that have, that we've kind of stressed over in obscure ways. Kind of the most famous one maybe is like the way that arrows work. Arrows binding to each other, moving, updating as you kind of move things around, and picking their corners and picking how they intersect, and all the fallback scenarios for all of this, and just making them look like perfect, which is really hard to do. And so if I switch this out into a star, you can see how it's kind of picking its intersection points, based on the kind of the hull shape of the thing. Even if I do something like draw something like this, it's gonna follow that curvature, and that's again kind of a fun little hard problem to solve. And yeah, like you can see, it's multiplayer. We've put a lot of effort into making sure that experience is as good as it can be, in part because I like fast things that work well. Who doesn't, but also because that's also like the biggest thing that people ask for when they say like, hey, I want to use Tealdraw, like, can I use your multiplayer? In the past, I've had to say, no, this is our own implementation. And so now is something that I can say yes to. I'm just noticing that it's at the half hour, so I don't know if maybe it's a good time to switch into kind of like questions, and we can grow it from there. But one more thing that I'll show off while we're talking. So mentioned that there's a like code sandbox here. I don't know if this, let me try to see if this will work. This is one of the kind of the value propositions, again, of using a DOM driven canvas. You can make not only nice little bookmarks that actually work, but since I'm not sure, I'm going to do Google Maps instead. maps.google.co.uk. So that's where I'm at. This is my lovely neighborhood here in London. And if I grab this URL and I paste it into the app, then we get a map. And this is not a picture of a map. This is the same map that you would get on any website. You can double click into it and actually interact with the map directly, because it's just an embed. It's just the web. And this is the type of thing that gets, I don't know, most people when they want to build apps that use this kind of canvas, they don't want to make a graphics or design application. They want to make something that uses interactive bits of the web. They want to put React components and like normal web shit onto the canvas. And so that is what we're designed to do. And boy, is that hard. But that's the job. So cool. You want to switch into questions?
Sure. Yeah, if you're ready for it.
I'm ready.
Awesome work.
Thank you.
It's incredible to also see the journey from globs to perfect arrows, Excalidraw, all the way to Tealdraw, and now Tealdraw as component that you can use to create your own Canvas app or drop a Canvas app into your the tool that you're building. So it's pretty great.
Thank you.
Yeah, so folks, feel free to unmute if you would like. You can raise your hand if there's like and kind of get in line. Oh, Bill, I already see you got an answer. Go ahead.
Steve, I've got two questions for you.
Sure.
The first one is Tealdraw being used by LogSeq?
Yes, it is. So
Okay.
LogSeq's canvas is built on top of, it's a fork of one of the previous versions of Tealdraw.
Well, what's interesting is there are a lot of Canvas sub apps showing up in other tools for thought. So Obsidian recently introduced a Canvas, and there are a couple of other tools like Scrintle and Heptabase that have their own Canvas, and they kind of present themselves as mind mapping tools, which I love. Now, as a writer and blogger, when I start thinking about an article that I want to write, I love to do it in a canvas so that I get a visual idea of how I want to arrange my thoughts and, you know, what is subservient to another thought, etc. But what I'd like to do is then take all the elements of that drawing, let's call them cards, and turn those cards into Markdown, and then be able to export that to an outliner app. And from there, I do the actual editing of my text content. And then I go from there and I, you know, publish it to WordPress or export it to some other publishing social network. Is there a single tool that does that? Or are there connections, easier connections between the canvas, the Markdown, and then the export of that Markdown?
Yeah. So I don't know. I think I've used like Scrivener for some long form writing, in part because they have, well, it's kind of a couple of tools in one, but I know that Scrivener has like a corkboard type of a view, and that is again, it's a kind of a way of organizing the stuff that you're creating in this. That is something that I would like. There are one of the biggest difficulties working on this project is not building all the things with it that I know that could be built with it. But that is that's absolutely something that you could build with Tealdraw, both either to have multiple editors, you know, like text editors inside of the thing, and then just the big button that says, you know, okay, well, let's organize these, or let's export them based on some sort of connection.
Right.
The fun part about having like an application like this, where it's fairly easy to get data in and it's very easy to get data out, is that you can start writing these powerful like parsing, I suppose, functions. Basically, you can just like use this as the fundamental part, or just, I don't know, it's one part of another application. And maybe that is like being, you know, these two steps, or maybe it's all three. But it could, yeah. The problem with this type of an application is it's so big to work on that it hardly ever makes sense to have like a long flow that just has one part, which is Canvas, because you're going to spend, you know, 50,000 person hours building this Canvas. And so it only really makes sense if it's the only interface in your application. I think the fun possibility of Tealdraw is inserting this type of direct manipulation, infinite canvas, whatever you want to call it, as maybe a smaller part of an application or a smaller part of a flow. And some of the things you mentioned, like LogSec or Obsidian, other applications that just use Canvas as like a view, I think is already starting to be part of that. And I hope that Tealdraw makes it possible to, or like rational to include canvases, in flows where it's not the only thing, but it can still be a big contributing factor to, I don't know, overall user experience or success.
Thanks, Steve.
Cheers.
Alan.
Yeah, Steve. Hey,
Hey.
as always, incredible. And we're using Teal Draw for some HyperTalk stuff. This question
Oh, cool.
also falls into too many things to build, but as Bill was asking that, I was thinking that like, okay, maybe a step toward interoperability. I know with OPML format and things like that, and whenever you take what's on a canvas and try and decompose it into something linear, the problem is how do you decide, what's the top node versus what are the children, right? So I was that led me to, is there any thought of adding metadata, or you might say like a design system that someone could sort of say, hey, these boxes I want to call yellow, and yellow is going to mean, or it's either going to be styled in this way or it's going to mean this, so that a plugin writer could say, okay, all things that are yellow are going to be styled this way in an outline format, and all things that are red are going to be children or whatever. I don't know. I know that's very Figma-like to start to get into design systems, and it's a never-ending.
No. I think it's. I'm trying to think of. So I guess I would call that like metadata. Is being able to attach certain metadata to shapes that you can then read back. Short answer, yes. Long answer, boy, is that complicated with multiplayer. And the reason for that is data integrity and making sure that the data that gets propagated and persisted between different machines doesn't contain anything unexpected. And so I think in general, I'm pushing a lot of this type of complexity. Months ago, when I was on Adam's podcast, on the Muse podcast, they asked this question too, and or something like it, and I was like, I'm deferring a lot to developers to say, like, if you want to make that application where you can annotate and edit things like that way, I just want to make it very, very easy for you to do that. And that's true. The hard part is saying, like, well, here's this experience, and we're going to also enable this sort of level of customization inside of tealdraw.com or inside of like a certain instance of the application. But if I was going to be making an application where whatever, I wanted to be able to mark things as private and public, right? Or something like export this, don't export this. It's just as an example of metadata. You could absolutely do that. We have all the bits and pieces for you to be able to do that. And then you can take that information and either render it however you want or export it and handle it that way.
Another way to think about it might be like if you're about to do something collaborative and everybody engages and activates a certain theme, and that certain theme is really just not just aesthetics, but it's a set of rules, right?
Yeah.
That applies to whenever there's an octagon, it's going to be treated this way. I don't know if that would that be a thing. Could a developer make sort of theme rules?
Yeah, that's interesting. Again, like working with the code, like working with things this way. I think the answer is yes. We haven't really picked a strategy for like runtime plugins on tealdraw.com. So like our kind of flagship version of this. But that's something that has come up is like, well, if I and my team all want to share the same plugin or the same extension, can we do that, without having to create a new application in order to do it?
Okay.
Maybe someday. I don't know.
Yeah. No, I appreciate it. It's fantastic.
I can understand though that it would be pretty cool.
Boris?
Yeah, I think I think in general, we really started this as talking about interop, and we're nowhere close. And 2 years
later.
And Canvas obviously heads in the same direction of there's a bunch of Canvas apps. What does it look like to have some importable, exportable, Canvas things? Does that even make sense between different Canvas applications? So I think you kind of answered that in different ways, and I think the whole like what are the boundary state of the system is very interesting. I'd love to hear a little bit more about the like runtime plugins, OEmbed, like where do you think is the boundary of where you want to go with Tealdraw?
Yeah, I think the well, one of my hopes for Tealdraw, like as a developer software, something that other people can build on, is that I think that the only way, I think it's a more realistic path towards interop for Canvas, is that already the fact that you can copy from your whiteboard in World Anvil and paste it into your whiteboard in Legend Keeper, even though they're direct competitors to each other, like is already like so cool. And I think that that's only going to get bigger with Tealdraw as more and more apps.
But what you're saying is a Tealdraw monoculture. You're like, as long as everyone everywhere uses Tealdraw, screw the Muse guys.
Or the Tealdraw schema, right? Because like
or the schema, right? That's the other way. Is that
you're exporting JSON, right? You're not exporting
exactly
SVG. I mean, some things are SVG.
I mean, we can export SVG, but no, this is, I mean, for Tealdraw to be popular, that would be great. Great for me. For Tealdraw to be popular enough that it becomes has momentum in terms of establishing some sort of standard of like what does like clipboard content look like for an app like this, that would be great. If it's so successful that we are able to like grow a spec around it, that would be wonderful. But I haven't really seen that attempted, like a spec that describes Canvas content. The closest thing that I can think of is like hash.ai with their what do they call it? Blocks. Yeah, they're thinking more in terms of like Notion style blocks, which are not that far away from what Tealdraw is, but it's weird to say like block.
Interesting recent one is Obsidian documented their .canvas format, which we wanted to take a look at, and actually is pretty close to the Muse bundle export format. But yeah, I agree that probably more important, copy paste feels like a really important one to try to get right, and it feels like you should be able to copy paste simple shapes and arrows and text from Keynote to Tealdraw to Muse to something else. But I also note that text still doesn't really copy paste particularly well between my email client, my word processor, and my presentation software, and always requires a million tweaks to the bullets and the font size and the the white space and whatever else. So I don't know. In some utopia, you'd be able to cleanly copy paste between those and unrecognized objects, which is kind of be question marks or something. I think the reality is we can get sort of close, but it's probably be like text is going to be unstable, sadly.
I mean, for what it is worth, I was working today on doing a copy and paste from Tealdraw, so maybe we'll do a little demo of what that looks like. Does it work? Hey, there we go. Cool. It's hard. Even copy and paste within Tealdraw is like a nightmare, as I'm sure anyone who's worked on this type of problem has. But again, open source, the fact that you might have multiple applications that are built on this stuff, I think it's a start. And hopefully we do get to a point where what can appear on the canvas is a little bit common enough that we have a strong spec. But I haven't looked too deep at the Obsidian Canvas format. Maybe I should. But yeah.
Jump to William's question. William Kelly asks, does it support any sort of syntax highlighting / markdown? So,
not yet. No. Markdown, we did have it at one point, and we took it back out, and then we added it again, and we took it back out again. In part because it's not totally clear the difference between Markdown for these type of like label shapes, and Markdown for like blocks of text where you want to do like rich text editing within it. And some of the UX around labels, once you add that like a full set of like Markdown features, starts to like break down. So it's more of a user experience thing than anything else. But yeah, it's also I certainly don't want to build this from scratch, and most of the vendors are like open source projects for rich text Markdown are not built with canvases in mind. But I expect we'd see that in the future for Tealdraw. And no syntax highlighting yet, but it's this is the idea with Tealdraw is to have a like this .com experience. At least the product, the role of this is sort of as a top of the funnel application for a developer product. So we want to make this as good as possible, especially for developers, because they're the potential customer. I'm also a developer. It's hard not to build features for myself. So I would expect to see some more like Cody friendly things in Tealdraw in the future.
Alan, I don't think you have a quick question because I know you.
Yeah, I know we're running up on time.
We've got like 90 seconds before Adam needs to go. So
very quick, just for posterity, the globs designer is so cool, and there's something there that's like, I saw that and I was like, oh man, I wish I could have a relational database where I could actually configure the shapes around it, like and add meaning to how these things are related in an aesthetic way. There's something I'm tripping on that. I love it.
Thank you. It was a really fun project to work on, and yeah, I think right now it's like most popular in like Japan. So people doing it for like typography, like kind of brushstroke based typography. It's fun. It's open source if you want to run with it.
Pull requests welcome.
Exactly.
I haven't checked that repo in a long time. Oh my god.
Steve, excellent presentation, and yeah, it's really cool to see kind of your progress. One of the things that I'll tell folks, if you're not already following Steve on Twitter, you definitely should. He has really embodied this sort of like work on things in public through his Twitter feed and that kind of stuff. So you can kind of, if you want to know what he's working on, you just scroll through his timeline. He's not very secretive about it. So yeah, definitely check out Steve's stuff, and yeah, give Tealdraw a try if you're looking at embedding a spatial canvas. I wanted to switch over and let Adam talk about Muse, and
cool. We'll stop sharing. Thanks,
Steve.
Great stuff, Steve. Even just in the time, I think the last time I looked at Tealdraw was when you were on our podcast, which was not even all that long ago, 5 months ago, and a lot of improvements since then. So as always with products that you're following along with, it's the improvement over time, I feel like, is where the excitement comes from. Later on, maybe when they're more embedded in your life, then that's when you start to want them to stop changing. But early days, it's really nice. Yeah, thanks for having me here. I'll get my screen share going. And as I mentioned, I sent out few invitations to folks. If you do have a Mac or an iPad and you want to join the multiplayer, please just shoot me your email in the chat. You can jump in now if you want. So I see we've got someone here already. So yeah, my name's Adam, and I'm part of Muse. And so we have what we like to think of as a canvas for thinking. So unlike, maybe similar in terms of the, get a couple more invites coming here. In terms of the kind of the shape of the product does look similar to something like Tealdraw or Tealdraw, or for that matter, a design tool like a Sketch or a Figma. But the use case is thinking, right? And so something that the Tool for Thought group will understand well, but I think the idea of using computers for thinking as opposed to analog tools like sketchbooks, whiteboards, and so forth is still a kind of a new idea. And so one of the reasons we're excited about the kind of the growth of the Canvas space is that that's makes it easier for us to explain what we're doing. As more and more people are looking for a canvas as a thing they might want to have on their computer, and particularly a canvas for thinking, it's easier to talk about. So yeah, I'm just going to give you a quick demo of Muse. I want to talk about the Canvas document type, and especially what we've learned having a product in the market for a while. And then we've been working on our multiplayer now for about working on it longer than 4 months, but we sort of had an alpha going, and we have a few learnings from that are a little bit earlier here. So I'll go ahead and get started with the demo. So basically, Muse is like other canvases you've seen. It can expand in both directions. You can move what we usually call cards, those are these things, around freely on the board. You can add all kinds of media types. You can do freeform sketching. We started life as an iPad app, so therefore we have like very good pencil and sketching support. So these are something that so these are things you're probably all familiar with. But here, let me show you a few things that we do a little differently, hoping that might indeed be, help us stand out in the market, if that's the right way to put it. So here's nested boards as the first one. So you've kind of already seen that I've been doing this. I've been navigating in and out. So there's this kind of outer containing board. Double click to jump in here, and then I can do that again. And this can go infinitely, kind of as shown in this diagram here. And for those of you that know your HCI history, this is often referred to as a zooming user interface, and is something that outside of maybe something like Google Maps, I don't feel like has ever really made it into a sort of a let's call it like a mainstream successful commercial product. But because humans are so strong on spatial reasoning, this just seems like a really obvious thing to do. Now, happily, through the design tools world, starting with Illustrator up through Sketch and Figma, now this kind of zoom as the kind of free zoom concept is something that's become a lot more common. But we want to take it to this next level where you have this nesting that's similar to file systems like this, but it is much more visual, right? That I can always see. So if I was to, do something like this and jump out, I can always see that no matter how many levels out I go, I sort of see that represented, right? And that is what allows you to orient yourself within that space. And by the way, folks can feel free to jump in. I prepared this mostly as starting points for discussion rather than to be a monologue.
You said nothing but a word there, Adam.
Say again?
My team, you said nothing but a good word there in regards to spatial, or at least spatial orientation. That's one of the things I can say that I've liked most about Muse, at least the way that I think. I think everybody has their own mental model. The spatial orientation, the nesting of a board rather than the layering, if you will, Photoshop, seems to fit better for me as a personal thinking space. And that's where Muse really set it off for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, nice. Yeah, I think the reason we haven't been able to do this historically is more just computers weren't powerful enough to represent these things in this way. File system, I think actually your computer's desktop is the closest thing, but that's kind of a weird one-off. And in any case, you put something there and you get this little blurry thumbnail and there's a file name, and it has some elements of that. You can make little piles of things and that kind of stuff. So yeah, I think basically computers have only just become powerful enough that we can indeed tap our spatial reasoning. Now it leads to the next thing, which is everyone has very different ideas of actually how to organize, and even whether people think spatially or visually versus other ways is also something that's personal and different between them, and that becomes quite a question once you get into the team's topic.
I must say this is kind of surprisingly unique, even though it's similar to other metaphors of nested file systems. The idea of linking to another card is usually a two-dimensional flat thing that we do in canvases, but to link to another map is, like I said, surprisingly intuitive, because it's how we've done things on computers for decades.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I think so, but again, what we've been able to do historically, and I do think things like file explorers and the web and other things have some elements of this, but they're limited by the technology at the time. So we only started this 3 years ago, which actually makes us fairly venerable in tools for thought, perhaps. But we could really reinvent things and think about what have we learned from the mobile space. People like direct manipulation. They want to put their finger down on the screen and move something around. When I have an image, I don't want a file name, just show me the image, right? And we could put that together with some of these more sophisticated, but typically, of course, the mobile design world is more end user, designed to be as simple as possible. You can do it with one finger. We wanted to say, what if you had all that power user stuff like files and nested hierarchies and a lot of things that have been part of power use of computers for a long time, but bring also some of what you can do, and indeed some of the just design aesthetic that comes from the mobile world. So that was kind of the basis of some of our origin story, let's say.
Adam, are you game for questions about the Teams feature? Is now a good time for that?
Yeah, why don't I
or do you want to
yeah,
keep
well,
going,
I'll tell you
or,
what, let's
like,
do it non-linear. I think that's in the spirit here. We can jump out to our multiplayer implications here. But yeah, feel free to just fire away with questions if you want, or I could give a little spiel on kind of what we've done so far in the multiplayer.
Yeah, why don't you start? Because you might answer my question with your spiel.
Yeah.
So yeah, go for it.
So I'll start right off the bat here, which is, you see obviously in the corner here, we've got the little avatars. One immediate thing that we did differently was, as you navigate around this continuous world, right? You're never really opening and closing a document, you're just navigating to it. I can see where everybody else is, right? There's two folks that are in this board I just left. There's one person who's in this board with me right now. And indeed, I can even right click on a person and to jump to them potentially, or to follow them. And this is sort of this sort of sense of place idea. So I guess the place to start here is, really Figma set the standard, right? And they were coming from the lineage to me of design tools. Like Illustrator was the first infinite canvas I ever saw. That goes back to the 90s. I remember watching a designer work within infinite canvas, or within the Illustrator canvas, and of course compared to Photoshop, which I was used to, and I thought of it as, oh well, Illustrator is the same thing but for vector. But actually she would explore some ideas over here and be like, that's weird, I'm going to go to this corner over here and explore ideas. I'm going to combine them both, so I'm going to put those ideas kind of in the middle and use the space as a way to basically explore an idea. And that was 10 or more years ago. And then since then we've seen that Figma and now others have added in multiplayer. And I think that multiplayer, even the simplest form of, like, you've got avatars in the corner and you see folks' cursors floating around. This person here is on an iPad, which is why you get the little viewport square, works just really well. I think it's much more natural than, say, like text editing or something like that. So you take the Google Docs style kind of avatars, you throw them into an Illustrator or a sketch style canvas, and you get something that works really well with the cursors, with the ability to follow people. I can show you that feature quickly. If I click here on this one, now I'm following this person, and I sort of see up here that I'm following them. I can actually wander away if I want, and then I get a little kind of, actually that didn't work right. Let's try a different one. Like that is broken. Never mind. But in any case, yeah, you can follow people, but you can also kind of explore on your own. That is something that I think that
Adam, can you recommend people follow you? Can you be like, hey, I'd like to lead a tour?
Yeah, so like broadcast a beacon, hey everyone follow me. Yes, that's a feature on the roadmap for sure. But yeah, you can click my avatar here if you want to try following me.
Because I find sometimes people get lost and they're like, hey, where is everyone, so to speak?
Well, indeed, yes, that's right. So that leads to some of our learnings here. But yeah, I think one of the reasons the canvas and multiplayer go so well together is what I usually call the sense of place. And that's one of the reasons we chose to do this. You can kind of see where folks are in the world, and it creates this ambient awareness. And we have a pretty extensive team workspace, and it's actually really cool to be able to see roughly where people are without fully snooping on them. Kind of has a nice thing here. So really, we wanted to take our personal tool and add in, take those same observations from Figma and to a lesser degree other multiplayer tools and see how that would work as like sort of a team workspace.
Hey, mind if I jump in really quick, Adam?
Fire away.
My team has been using the Muse for Teams Alpha since, Muse for Teams Alpha came about. And one of the pieces of feedback that I personally have gotten, because my Muse board is not as clean as what Adam is showing right here, is because there's not yet a beacon feature. A lot of folks really do need that. Okay, where on your board are you referring to? And so when that feature comes, it'll be absolutely great. But there's a whole lot of folks who they can't just be dropped on a canvas and figure their way around. So everything from layout to colors to headings all become really good pointers or points of interest to help them figure out where they are in relation to the space. And then when they get to that area, they're kind of more or less able to follow your brain at that point. Okay, this is what you were thinking. This is how we as a team need to collaborate. And that follow feature in the last 2 meetings that we've had as a team that we've used has been really helpful for letting folks kind of come to that place. So they have an idea of what this is, and then they just detach and kind of run away from there. So the follow is almost like an informal anchor, has been like an informal anchor for us, which has been pretty cool.
Awesome.
Nice. Yeah, well, so Antoine's been giving us awesome feedback through the beta of the personal tool, and since that was kind of out in the App Store, and now he brought his team on for the alpha here, and also is giving great feedback. But yeah, I think for sure when you have an Antoine on your team who's a master at this tool and in general a good explainer and a good thinker that can be, an advocate and evangelist and bring people in, be the host, be the be the teacher, that sort of thing, that works really, really well. So one of the challenges we will have is indeed that people on the team who are coming into this who are less invested or just less naturally inclined to try new things, or the visual thinking model doesn't fit as well with them. I think the tool in our company and the various things, onboarding materials we're creating should hopefully ease that as much as possible. I feel like I had the same thing with Notion, actually, when there was like someone on our team that kept trying to get us to use it years ago. And I was like, what is this weird thing? I don't get it. It doesn't make sense. It seems worse than Google Docs. And this person just kept beating us over the head and trying to show the cool things it could do and show why it was better. And slowly I came around. So I think that's the challenge with any new tool. But
there's so many examples of this. I loved Quip. Before it got bought by Salesforce. I switched to Dropbox Paper, which was great, and had a few nuances to it and everything else like that. I think some of these things end up being interesting. I mean, you allow for all export data format, and you've got JSON in there, so all your stuff can be parsed or moved into something else, right?
Correct. So if you export a board, you can obviously do it as a PDF that has everything's clickable and selectable and so forth. PNG is just easier for sharing on social media or whatever. But the Muse bundle is actually just a zip file that has all of the assets that are in it: PDFs, PNGs, videos, whatever else are just files. The ink all goes as SVG, and then there's essentially a JSON file that just describes the position of every card, XY position of every card. So coming back to that point of the interop between canvases and the format we came up, which we weren't intending to make a standard, we just wanted to make something that was introspectable. And then I saw what Obsidian did. They are trying to make theirs a standard, but it's basically pretty similar. It's a JSON file that tells you the position of the cards. The schema, is going to vary a little bit, but yeah, exactly. So, but I think it's tough because, on one hand, of course, you don't ever want to trap people's data, but on the other hand, canvases are still new and rare enough that realistically in export, if you decide your team wants to leave this and take your stuff somewhere else, you're probably taking it to a Dropbox folder or a Notion page or something else that is not a canvas. And then exactly as was mentioned earlier, how do you, something like all of this right here, how exactly do you serialize or turn that into take a 2-dimensional thing or 3-dimensional if you want to count the nesting and turn that into 1-dimensional you could make some guesses, but
my prompt would be is not the export to leave that you're like, okay, I guess I can get my useless data out, but my prompt would be not a joke. When are we doing the Canvas apps hackathon? Right, which is the reverse of what's being done right now, right? Like, so what's the other app? Is it Pocket to Muse or vice versa or whatever, right? Like what are those other flows that actually gets us to the rich ecosystem of other apps, which then possibly get to play with things that aren't Canvas based at all, but can and are better formatted for other things. Like, so for an example, someone could do Remarkable to Muse. Remarkable, I have a lot of issues with, where I'm like, you idiots, you should be more of an open platform. But that's a choice. Alan, I cede to you. My handless talking is over.
Okay, great. Well, I'll try and keep it short, but I do have 3 very different kinds of questions, all pretty much UX. Most tactical, I saw that you have what appear to be like list elements, and that's so interesting. Maybe it's just that you like pushed some. Yeah. Is that just making boxes and kind of like lining them up, or is there are there different primitives than here's a note?
Yeah, so very common in kind of these, like a digital whiteboard app is the Postit Note, right? The Postit is such an incredible, kind of creativity thing over the years, and just I think someone had mentioned Scapler earlier, which is the companion to Scrivener. But the idea of just like you're saying, kind of a thing that looks roughly like a sticky note that you can then kind of move around on the page. And indeed, we even let you scribble on it as well. Do this. And then the ink kind of sticks to the card and comes with it. So sticky note style thing, that's really common in digital whiteboards. What we felt was that at some point, the whiteboard thing is sort of limited and text as a first class thing is more important. So basically anywhere on a canvas, I'll go ahead and just make a new board here. You can double click, you get the blinking cursor, and you just start typing. So, and in fact, we've actually considered making it for new boards that it just starts like this, and there's no indication even that it's a multidimensional canvas. You just think that it's a text file, just like any other, where you can just start typing, hello world.
That's great.
Some text and so on. And we do a little bit of like you can do some like reordering and things. It kind of has something in common with like Notion style blocks or that sort of thing. And you can do like really basic formatting and so on. But you can then position it anywhere. So if you think of it a little bit like the outliner style tool for thoughts, where maybe you're going to start with 1, and then you're going to indent a little bit. But at some point, I like to kind of go off to the side. I realize it's actually a whole other like tangent, and so then I'm like exploring that. Maybe I'll connect them together a little bit. And so what I end up with is sort of, even I might end up with a board that's 100% text. This happens all the time, but the text is laid out spatially. It sort of flows in different directions here. Antoine, I bet you have something to say about this.
Yeah, I do. Totally. So one of the things that attracted me most to Muse was the fact that text goes anywhere, and not text. If your mental model, and I kind of want to take like Obsidian, Notion, etc., and put those on one end of the scale as, if you will, collaborative thinking text blocks. Muse actually sat on the other side as personal think space, where things are really not structured. And because things aren't structured, you kind of need the text to go anywhere. So this ability to have the text note that we see on the screen here on the left side, top left side, as well as text itself on the bottom of the left side, being able to push and move those typed pieces of text anywhere, really beneficial, really awesome. Compared to what you see from Adam's board here, my boards tend to have a crap load of ink because iPad is my computer, and that's kind of the way I run. So having the ability to kind of move that text around, move those thoughts around, if you will, before it gets into a handoff state has really been, kind of the reason why Muse kind of sits on the other end of the whiteboarding scale. It's, there's really a continuum of those apps, of these kind of applications, these spatial thinking thoughts apps. I think Muse kind of sits more on the side of what do I personally think first, rather than what do we collaboratively think or need to hand off to next.
Love it. The second question's a bit of an observation or something, but I consider myself very much a spatial thinker. I've got boards all over, but when I tried Muse out on the iPad, I couldn't quite figure out like how to use it. Like actually, oddly enough, on desktop, I feel like it makes a lot more sense, or I can even seeing your examples here, it like clicks in a way that on my own, I was kind of just dumping in random, like white papers and stuff and just sort of clustering them around and like, okay, what do I do with this now? So I think that there's a subtle difference between people who are one way, serial versus nonlinear or something, and this kind of not exactly knowing the vibe of it or the what to do. So that's just an observation. If you have comments on that or thoughts, otherwise let's jump to the third thing.
Yeah, well, that feels like there's two forks there. One is, does a messy, fairly free-form, open-ended space that encourages a lot of visual and spatial thinking, does that fit with someone's brain versus give me a plain text file, because it's literally, one dimension. I start typing and the cursor goes. And that's I think there is just different brain types on that. The other piece of it is, especially for the iPad, for Mac, obviously a desktop computer is built for productivity. So we can rely on all kinds of not only system provided stuff, but just conventions, right? What happens when you select? What do I get when I right click in terms of the menu? What do I get in the top menu, et cetera? So much we could count on there. What key command do I hold if I want to multi-select, that kind of stuff. iPad, the reason we started there is we do think it's a unique, potentially really unique tool for thinking, but it's underutilized precisely because it kind of has this legacy of the consumer phone, do everything with one finger, don't make it too complicated, don't let you mess anything up, which obviously is fine for certain kinds of apps, but we wanted to be a power tool on iPad. And actually the company itself came out of some research from a few years back where we published a paper on it and folks liked it enough. We wanted to start the company. And so in a way, it's more challenging to learn the iPad version because we invented a whole bunch of kind of UI and special gestures and edge swipes and things like that are very powerful if you get fast at it. Just watch Antoine do it to get a feel for that. But the gap in what you need to learn relative to things you already know about how to use an iPad is pretty big. The Mac is, it's like, oh, there's a toolbar with, buttons I can click on. And if I click to place a comment, I just click and start typing and then I click out and then and so all of these conventions, but again, desktop computers are more powerful. They have, decades of accumulated sort of UI conventions that we can rely on. So therefore you have less of a diff in learning it. I would guess that's a part of it as well.
Gotcha. That's great. The third thing, I'll be quick, is but I think you'll have thought about it probably just because I love your podcast, and so this is kind of a design philosophy question, right? There's not an easy answer, but say you've got something, this may be what the beacon is, but say you've got something that's 8 levels deep and you highlight it and you want to be able to see that at the toppest level or at an X-ray level or some sort of synoptic view. There's so many different ways to go about it, from like Amazon videos X-ray view when you hit pause and you could see what's going on in the scene, to maybe like I want to subscribe to this person, but it seems like why it seems like design philosophy, and I'd love to hear your take on it, is that it seems very similar to the problem of, say, like nested forums or Reddit or something, where someone deep down in a nest says something that is brain busting, but there's no way to get that to pop that up top other than this kind of like voting system or something. I'm interested in how you decide that the infinite canvas as a metaphor is good but not enough what's the other kind of metaphor, or are there other metaphors that you're thinking about? Antoine,
well,
I'd love to hear what you say too, Ed. It's awesome. Okay, go ahead.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you say metaphor. I think you do need a central organizing metaphor for a given kind of workspace. For us, we've settled on the canvas. We think that's unique. We think it introduces a lot of things that don't exist in the word processor, where the metaphor is, you basically a typewriter, for example. But we think that particularly when you go to multiplayer, but this is true even single player as well, that you need different views on the data. And partially, it's exactly what you described. Once you get really complex and rich boards, there's simple things like search or archival as two examples, but I think different views against the same data that reflect how different people's brains work. And then the other thing that I think is relative to the thinking tool, which is kind of a similar idea, is you may make a really messy set of boards fractally exploring an idea, and then you get to your aha moment, like you said, 8 boards deep. There's a version of that to me where I'm going to do a little extra work to lift out just the important insights and a couple of I laid out 27 different sources, and from 3 of those, I found a pattern that led me to my aha moment for what we should do. I'm going to lift out a tiny subset of that and put it into some form to share with my teammates, to give them some idea of my thinking and how I got to my insight, but don't basically don't dump all my messy stuff on them. So I think there's a version of that as well.
Yeah.
I'd say one thing that maybe hasn't been shown, and for others who haven't seen Muse, Adam, the inbox, is that still a thing?
Happy to demo that. I want to hear what Antoine had said on the last topic though.
So one of the challenges, and this was really neat about Muse for Teams. So personally speaking, I think I just shared a link to one of my personal Muse boards, totally a PNG. They get shared out, and it's 100% 8 levels deep. It is truly 8 levels deep. Might be a dozen levels deep by this point, because I'm making connections all the time. And then I want to surface certain connections to make the most sense. I find that Muse does a really good job in regards to the links, being able to kind of link to another board. There's a functionality called linked card that allows you to, from anywhere on one board, link to another card. And that really does help to surface items that you might spatially put together on a board or several types of boards. That method of work, or that method of loci, it's kind of like memory location. What's my memory palace is a little bit different. 100% Jess. It is a portal. And for the team that I work with, it was actually it's a jump, because while many of us might have that kind of legacy thought to, as Adam was saying earlier, of how we use a laptop or laptop desktop operating system, your boy here has been like mobile first since Symbian and a few other things. And so the scaled up metaphor, how it works in that wise, is like, how do people get to the thing that most fits your mindset, or most fits the thing that you want them to understand? Muse supports that, but it takes a different amount of work to get there. For my team, we did an exploration period where they got to play for a week before we went into the collaborative board. We did the whole agile thing of doing a working agreement, what works best, what doesn't work best. How do you want to use your own board? What does and doesn't constitute somebody jumping into your ideas and your thoughts? And we put some constraints around the community's board, the thing that all of us can play with, as well as some enablements around your own personal board. And that allows, me, who's got a little bit more experience in the spatial space, to just go ahead and make a dirty room. That's what my board looks like. And a few others who are using their boards or their cards as folders, almost in a sense, and dragging things out, because that's the methodology or the analogy that works best for them. So I think, at some level, Muse can't give you the structure. And I think the same thing as Steve was saying with Teal Draw, you can offer some structure, but you don't want to be so constrained by the application or the tool that you kind of lose this ability to jump into your own personal thoughts, or the way that you personally think about an item. Muse is really still, even in the collaborative space, it's still a personal thought tool first. And we try to give people space for that, but then help them understand, okay, well, this tool will allow other people who want to see your thoughts kind of come up with you or come to that level with you. So the linked cards, the text formatting, the follow feature, all of those fit that, hey, take a look into my brain at this juncture. And I think Muse does it really well. Miro is another product that does it really, really well. Yeah, that's all. That's all for that.
That's awesome. Maciek, I see you've had your hand up for a bit. Let you ask your question, and your question might be for Steve. So you did have a question that was lingering from the last session. So if that's you.
Yeah, I actually have two. First one is more question comment regarding Muse. So I've actually been working a bit on what I would call tools for thought in virtual reality. And the more we talk about, the spatial metaphors here and the canvases, it actually links more and more to our experience as humans just living in 3D. And I feel like I'm totally not suggesting to jump to that, because it's not a mainstream technology yet, virtual reality headsets, but even things like the nested spaces that you have here, even though it's in 2D, it would actually map quite nicely into, each of these spaces is a 3-dimensional space, and you're kind of flying through these windows from one to the other. Even when you look at it like this on the 2D canvas, you kind of could imagine that you're just flying, in the depth dimension into the screen. And but I think it's just interesting to think about how that progresses with also new hardware and new technologies, and like in 3D rather than 2D. But actually the question that I had was actually both for Adam and for Steve, I think, because one problem I have sometimes with these zoomable user interfaces is that they actually replicate the limitation of the physical world, I would say, in that you zoom out, you move away from stuff, and it gets very small, which, is in a way good, but also like you zoom out and the text, even the headings, like you can see it here, they get very small, they get basically unreadable, which for, text body of an article, you don't really want to read all of it at the same time, but a text heading, you might actually want to see a bit easier when you're zooming out. And my question is basically about support, both in Muse and in Tealdraw for like essentially scale independent content, so that you zoom out, but the text heading, let's say, still stays fairly large, so it doesn't just shrink related to zoom.
Yeah, I think of that as being like semantic zoom, something where here we obviously have a very literal, indeed pixel perfect thing for the imagery here is exactly what's inside of it. But I would love something that is more of a semantic zoom, which is, you zoom out of a PDF that's 300 pages long, and it gives you the 2-sentence summary. Or if I have highlights in there, it's actually telling me what have I said is important about this PDF. If I've highlighted 20 things and there's a word cloud, to use an old-fashioned thing, or some kind of AI summary, something like that. And that was an area of research we did in the same lab where we developed Muse. Ultimately, we determined we weren't able to find something that was sort of fast enough, both fast enough to compute and comprehensible to end users. Realize again, we skipped over it a little bit, but one of the insights that we've had from having this product out in the market for a little while is that most people find canvases pretty overwhelming. Just the fact that you can move in 2 dimensions. It sounds simple, but even just being completely literal, like you said, a completely literal replicate of a kind of a physical canvas or a physical writing space, even that is a lot. People are used to documents. You start at the top, you have the blinking cursor, it goes down from there. That's true for social media, it's true for your word processor, even something like a presentation tool that in theory is kind of a 2D canvas. You have very limited pages the pages start at the top and the page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4. So I think there's a combination of one sort of technology / HCI research to, as you said, to be able to make those kinds of semantic zooming options, and then two, I think it's just users. Once you've grasped the canvas, and that becomes more, and certainly a desire for me, and certainly for Steve, is to see this document type become very commonplace and something we're used to, the same way we're used to a text box you can type into. And I think once we get there, assuming that happens, then it will be a lot easier to be much more experimental in that way.
I think just as a very simple, version of this would be literally just leave the scale of a certain text box, as long as it's possible to actually fit that in the space that's available. Just don't shrink it. That would be very desirable to me, at least.
There was an app named Mischief many years ago. I think they sold their tech to something, but Mischief was amazing because the tools were essentially, no matter what zoom you were at, they were always the same. So in Tealdraw, if you zoom in and then you used your pencil or something, then your ink is going to be really big, right? Because it's like your eyeball is like right next to the screen or right next to the paper. But in Mischief, there was no 100%. Essentially, you could zoom in forever, write a little note, then zoom out, and write another note, and that ink would always be the same. And that was it was really weird, and it's definitely not possible to do in in HTML and CSS. But it was essentially like you might have it gave you that ability, kind of like Muse, of just having like a recursive experience of content where you could go in and then come out, and that old content would just be a part of the content that you were outside of. I think that talking about Canvas as like where does it feel normal to use? I don't think maybe it's the wrong view of someone who has a startup based around building this type of thing, but I don't think it's the right interface for everything. And I do think that certain tasks, especially collaborative tasks, make a lot more sense with Canvas, and also tasks where where you need to be able to dynamically create meaningful structures of data. And so an example of that would be like our actually, you know what, maybe I'll do this demo real quick. When we have our weeklies, right, for Tealdraw, where we talk about here's what's in progress and stuff, and we do that inside of a Tealdraw board. And the way that it grew up, I'm going to share my screen for just a second. The way that it started was this sort of idea of like a progress bar, right? We just drew a rectangle, and then we drew another rectangle inside of it that represents like how done a certain task is, right? And like when a project is complete, we just move it over here. But most of the time, projects get bigger as we work on them, so we can kind of always just kind of be moving this thing back and forth. This doesn't mean anything. Like there's no application that knows about this, that there's no literal connection or even data connection between these two things. Like as far as the app is concerned, these are just two shapes that have nothing to do with each other. But within the team and stuff, we know what this means. And because it's actually not captured by any sort of like data structure, it's not captured by any model, we can end up doing weird stuff with it. Like at one point there was a project that like, okay, well, there was like a middle part that needed to be split. And of course, like it was very natural to just be like, all right, well, let's just adapt that that model like really quickly. Everyone in the chat or everyone in the board knew what this means, is that there's stuff, whatever, we're just using like comic book type of terminology. We're using Skyrim logos to say what's the main task versus side quest. I mean, like, this ends up being a very, very meaningful thing within the team, but it doesn't actually, it's just shapes on the page. And this is, I think, the place where kind of Canvas can really thrive, is where it's so loose that you can end up creating like really rich, like original, on the fly, custom, meaningful things. And they're also disposable, because who cares? Like, you just move on to the next thing. And so this is it's not necessarily just picking the right domain that matches Canvas and makes Canvas like more useful, but I think it's also picking the right setting in which, and just getting used to using software that doesn't really know or care about what you're doing with it, and allowing you to create that meaning and create those structures yourself, socially, and collaboratively. And that's something that feels new and kind of feels strange, but which is very hard to do even in a collaborative text document or something. It's just yeah. So
Steve,
I don't know.
You hit on, Steve, you hit on exactly like the challenge for Muse and other whiteboarding apps, not just with my team, but other folks I've consulted with. Folks are used to the tool structuring their thoughts, and not used to structuring their thoughts and the tool letting them do so. And so what I think you've done, what I think, Adam and the Ink and Switch team have done, Miro teams have done really well, is that you've given a framework for thinking. Some of that may be personal thinking, some of that may be personal connecting of the thoughts, that allows teams to kind of think aloud, where before the tool was we think aloud because Word tells us to do it this way, or an Outlook message tells us to do it this way. Instead of folks really using the tool to express their thoughts, they were using the tool actually to think, where I think the spatial canvases are actually, hey, how do you think? Expose that. And that is new. In the shape of knowledge work, that it doesn't seem like it's new, but that is new. Bring your thoughts to the table, bring the shape of your thoughts to the table, and then let's do something with the shape of your thoughts, not let's do something with your thoughts. And it's a great space in my plate, but it needs every team has different guardrails. To the question that was asked to you about the design system for Tealdraw, every team will do that differently. What we enable or disable with that is different.
That's
I think, and I saw your note, Jess, that we're over time. But yeah, the difficulty of Canvases is always extracting data. We haven't really talked about how this is, especially in a whiteboard where the end state of the board doesn't contain all the information of what happened and why it's important. This is something that we're still exploring and looking at different ways of doing it. But it's fun. Every app that gives you a shred of creative freedom ends up, being used in interesting ways. In Figma, people started adding like emoji to certain pages to say like, hey, this is in progress versus this is not in progress. Figma didn't have is this page finished or not progress feature, but it had just enough kind of like creative wiggle room for people to implement that themselves. And I think the Canvas is like nothing but those type of, it's just wiggle room. It's all wiggle room. That's something new, and that's also something personally that I find so exciting about it, is that we've never been able to wiggle so much, and we don't know what when I look at because all these boards in Tealdraw are public, so I look at what other people are doing with this, and I've never seen any two boards that people have clearly spent time on that look anything alike. It's wild, and so I hope that continues, and it's just something new. So there you go.
I think you found your new marketing website headline: nothing but wiggle room.
Nothing but wiggles.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And that's both the challenge and the opportunity. Being so open, free form, malleable, not in the programming sense, but in the visual sense, is both the opportunity, why it feels like something new and something so creative compared to other tools that we've used in the past for this sort of activity, but at the same time is overwhelming, hard to get mainstream adoption, and honestly, maybe it never will. Maybe it's too much, but I don't necessarily think so. I think it really is just a matter of takes time for new people not only to learn new tools, but to learn the possibility and to be okay with the freedom and the flexibility and kind of find your own way to express yourself on the canvas.
That's probably a good closing phrase. I think all of this stuff is new. Really, Adam and Muse started at the very beginning of this in the same time of the pandemic, and Miro and Figma, going absolutely vertically, or the weirdo whiteboards feature in Zoom that I keep getting confused of what the hell does Zoom even do badly. Jess, do we want to do a round of thank you so much to Steve and Adam? Amazing as always. Thank you very much. And I'll let Jess hit this stop recording button.
Yep. And just one more thing for the recording. This is our 5th conversation we've had about spatial canvases. So we've heard from 10 different spatial canvas creators that are creating a wide variety of different things on top of spatial canvases. So feel free to go through and check out those other YouTube links to hear people building code editors on top of spatial canvases and all sorts of other really interesting tools. All right, I'll hit stop there.